and get started here. Thanks everyone for showing up and taking the time out of your day to join us. If you did join, it'd be great if you could just keep yourself on mute as we start to go through the presentations, and then we'll have time at the end for Q&A. So thanks so much all for joining us. My name is Rose Antaki. I'm a project coordinator at the Goldridge Resource Conservation District, and I focus on forestry and wildfire resilience here. And today's webinar is hosted by the Goldridge Resource Conservation District, usually referred to as an RCD. And it's in partnership with the Sonoma County Ag and Open Space, the City of Petaluma, and the LandSmart Grazing Program. And we are recording this webinar, and it's going to be available afterwards on the Goldridge RCD YouTube channel. And we'll send a follow-up email with resources and then the link to that recording afterwards. And I just wanted to shout out, this webinar is part of a county-wide educational initiative called the Resilient Forests and Watersheds Workshop Series. And this series is funded by a grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and it's also matched with the county's PG&E settlement funds for vegetation management. So a big thank you to all of our partners and funders on the project. And I also want to thank my coworker Emma, who's been my co-organizer for this event and is a co-host on this Zoom, and is going to help keep it all running smoothly. Thank you, Emma. Okay, so then we'll hop over to the next slide and I'll introduce our speakers. So I'm just going to do a quick overview of the agenda and then hand it over to our speakers. I'm really excited to learn from them today. They're all very knowledgeable in their fields, and we're lucky to have them here. So first, we'll hear from William Hart. William is a project manager at Goldridge RCD, and he'll be talking about the roles of RCDs and the LandSmart Grazing Program. And then we'll hear from Delana, Bradford, and Drew Halter, who work for the City of Petaluma. And Delana is a management analyst at the City of Petaluma, and Drew is the director of Parks and Recreation. And together, they've dedicated themselves to improving the fire safety and ecosystem health of Petaluma through the use of innovative grazing strategies. And that's what we get to hear more about from them today. Then we'll hear from Sarah Keiser, and Sarah's going to discuss the strategic planning that's necessary for a successful public land grazing project. Sarah is the founder of Wild Oat Hollow, and Sarah uses community-based, sustainable land stewarding concepts to empower private landowners and public entities, providing skills and support that they need to use grazing, planned burns, and community education to steward their land. And then finally, at the end, we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. And we'll also be joined by Dan Northern of Two Rock Grazing, who's the grazer contracted with the City of Petaluma, who'll be available to help answer any of your questions during that Q&A session, along with all of our speakers. And we're going to ask that you stay muted during the presentations. If you think of a question, you can drop it into the Zoom chat, and Emma and I are going to be monitoring that. And then at the end, we'll have your speakers answer those questions in the order that we received them, and we should have plenty of time for that. So thanks again to all of our speakers, organizers, project partners, everyone for joining us today. And I'm going to pass it over to William Hart.
Great. Thank you, Rose. Welcome all. Thank you for coming. And it is my pleasure to be here with you today. So this first slide that you're seeing here on the left-hand side is a picture of the state of California with all of the different resource conservation districts throughout the state. So we often refer to ourselves as RCDs. We are special districts similar to a fire district or a school district. So we are forms of local government, and our boundaries don't necessarily have logical reason, but we are representative throughout the state, from north to south, from east to west. And I put in a link in the chat to the CARCD website, which is the kind of umbrella organization for the entire state of that's made up of all the RCDs throughout the state. So you can, if you're not in Sonoma County, you can find your local RCD by using that map. They have an interactive map on their website. And then the picture on the right-hand side of your screen is looking at Sonoma County and Marin and Napa to our east and Mendocino to our north. But within Sonoma County, there are 2 resource conservation districts. So Gold Ridge there is kind of shown in that salmon color. And then surrounded by the blue, which is Sonoma RCD. And then I'm going to put in a link here as well to Gold Ridge's website with a interactive map as well. So you can find out if you are in whatever district you're in, if you're in Gold Ridge's or Sonoma's district. We work in partnership with Sonoma RCD, with Marin, with Napa, with Mendocino, very much in the spirit of collaboration and partnership. But I just wanted to, share that with you. So you can move on to the next slide, Emma. And then this is a picture of what our website looks like. So this is the landing page of our website, and our website address is down in the lower right-hand corner. So that's that goldridgercd.org. And I guess I would just stress here that we are non-regulatory. So we are a partner to our landowners and land stewards. We offer confidential assistance to our landowners, land managers, and we offer a variety of support. We're focused on natural resources, so soil, water, air, plants, animals, humans, and energy. And I guess if you want to know more about our history, if you want to know more about what type of services that we offer, I would encourage you to go to our website. When you first land on our website, there is a pop-up that shows up that you can sign up for our newsletter. We have presence on social media as well, but I would encourage you to sign up for our newsletter if you are interested in learning more or just exploring our website to learn more about our organization. All right, Emma. So then this next slide is just showing the different types of programs and areas of focus that we are involved in. We are an almost entirely grant-funded organization, so the type of help that we are able to offer depends on the type of funding that we have at any given time or any moment. But for agriculture, we're involved in agricultural programs, youth education programs, we forestry and fire programs. We do have a partner, registered professional forester with Sonoma RCD. Jason Wells is his name. Water quantity, water quality. We have watershed management plans. We're fortunate to have a number of salmon-bearing streams in our watersheds here. So again, I would just encourage you to check out our website and learn more if you are interested. All right, Emma. So then one of the programs that we offer is the LandSmart Grazing Program. This has been in existence since 2023. So we have had funding through the county. These were the vegetation management program. These were born out of the 2017 wildfires, the PG&E settlement dollars that were awarded to the county. They put some of those funds into a vegetation management program, which is a competitive grant process. And we applied in 2023 and received funding, and we developed a pilot program to bring contract grazing to private landowners throughout the county. And subsequently, each year we have been able to secure funding to continue this program. But today we're here, we're talking about most of you are public entities, public lands partners. The PG&E settlement dollar, there's kind of that pool of funding is going to continue to shrink as more and more of it gets spent, right? So we recognize that we need to secure some additional funding. And we did that through the Coastal Conservancy. They have a wildfire resilience program that we applied for in 2023. And we pitched the project to them, thinking that we would just continue to focus on private lands, continue to develop our program of utilizing contract grazing on private lands. The Coastal Conservancy received our application and asked us, instead of private lands, to focus on public lands. We said, sure, that's great. Let's pivot. Let's do some outreach to our public partners to see what their needs are and what type of support that they want to see. So we were able to do that. We were able to secure funding in 2023. It took us a bit to get the grants agreements in place, but in 2024 is really when we started work on that program. So you can switch, Emma. So this paragraph here is just kind of one of our what we use in our scope of work and what we used in our application. And we went in thinking that we were going to just continue to focus on contract grazing. And that's going to be an element of our program. But the feedback that we got from our public lands partners was that they also wanted to see funding for infrastructure, or in the City of Petaluma's case, they were asking for help to develop a master plan for grazing. So we've been able to work with the Coastal Conservancy to kind of pivot what our program focus was to incorporate the needs of our public lands partners. So right now, we had an application process. We're working on about, I think, 9 different projects with our public lands partners. And so it's folks like the Laguna Foundation, Sonoma County Regional Parks, Sonoma Coast State Parks, the City of Petaluma, City of Cloverdale, City of Santa Rosa, the Audubon Canyon Ranch, their Modini Preserve, and I think that's all of our public lands partners that we're working with. And you can advance, yeah, Emma, thank you. So, me personally, I'm just really excited about what the City of Petaluma has undertaken. I think they are really acting as a model for us and for the county about how to use livestock to turn what is a management burden into a resource. So I think I'm just gonna end on that note, but I just want to recognize, the partnership of Sarah Keiser from Wild Oat Hollow. I really want to, just really appreciate Sarah and her vision and the support that she's bringing us. And also just recognize our partners at Sonoma RCD, and just want to express my gratitude to the county for continuing to support our program, and then also the Coastal Conservancy for the funding and the support that they are bringing us. So I will pass now over to Delana and Drew.
Wonderful. Thank you, William. Go ahead and get our slides up here. All right. Well, thank you all for the opportunity to present our grazing program to you today. The fact that you're taking time out of your busy day to explore grazing as a solution for your jurisdiction is really exciting for us as well. Drew and I have gotten such joy from this program, and it's honestly one of those programs that doesn't even feel like work because it's been so wonderful to work amongst all of these wonderful people. And really everyone that we've come across in this industry is just so passionate about the work that they do. And we're going to give you an overview of our program, outline some of the challenges that we've faced, the opportunities that lie ahead of us, and leave you with some easy to follow tips if you're exploring a grazing program of your own. So without further ado, we'll kick this off with an introduction to our internal team. So as we mentioned, we have Drew Halter, our Director of Parks and Recreation. Myself, Delana Bradford, Management Analyst, now with our Public Works Department. And although Sarah Keiser is not a city staff member, we would be remiss not to mention that she is an absolute integral part of this program and the success that we've seen so far. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Drew now for a program overview.
Thank you, Delana, and great to share the space with everybody. I know Sarah's going to go into more detail. We've also got our grazing partner, Dan Northern, on the call. So thanks for joining us, Dan. And really, again, those of you on the call taking the time, I see a couple of familiar names. Hector, welcome. Scott, thanks for being here. But those that, we haven't had an opportunity to work much with, Delana and I, again, this is such a joyful program. So we're happy to be a resource just to all of you after the call. So let's get into it. All of us share that similar thread, and we're all looking, and our communities are looking for ways and opportunities to move us closer to meeting our climate resiliency goals. And so that's really one of the impetuses that launched this program. But for us in Petaluma, 2022 came at the tail end of 3 very massive wildfires in the succession of 4 years, but also in the time that we as a city were updating our integrated pest management policy. And that's going to really set the course or plan about how our city was going to manage not just vegetation, but our natural places, facilities, etc. And the writing on the wall is we are moving away from more chemical treatments and abatements across our landscapes. So what is going to fill that void? Organics have a very few proven efficacy and efforts on a large scale. The costs are extremely up. So the opportunity here is to utilize grazing or take a really good look at, is it something that we could implement as a sustainable management tool? And that's kind of brought us to 2023, where we landed on, let's agree to some essential objectives. What are we trying to solve here? Obviously advancing our organizations, reaching some of our climate goals, but some of the less obvious one, let's evaluate the economics, right, of using animal grazing in our spaces. We all want to do not just for fuel reduction, but how do we start shifting our landscapes to become more resilient to other things, not just fire, but the effects of a warming climate, floods, etc. Embracing these methods of restorative land management trying to tie that into more of our integrated pest management policies were huge. But, how do we lessen the reliance of our mechanical means of vegetation management, which in our world translates to labor and labor's costs and everything that comes with that. It has true costs to other elements of how we manage our lands. Next slide, please, Delana. So we kind of touched on those overarching policies in the beginning, but for all of our municipalities, you're at different points often, whether you're updating your general plan or you're bringing forward climate goals. For us, we really looked at those three areas. We had a blueprint for climate action that was adopted. We had our integrated pest management policy, which at the time was working through as a draft. And then we also work under or live under the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, which some regions have more centralized plans. That's essentially what we look as a governing document to how we kind of manage our open spaces. So we look at this and we, like we all do, we see opportunities or policy windows to have a program that threads that needle. Then it's kind of on all of us to breathe as much energy as we can and jump through that door or thread it. Next slide, please. So I really love this slide, right? Because how are we here? Why are we here? How did we get here? During the initial research, we, like all of us, you reach out to your networks, you're engaging with anyone who's doing this, right? Who's grazing on public lands. And so these were some of the most interesting conversations we had. Delana and I still kind of joke about some of these meetings we took because this was a new world for us. Not so much Sarah and Dan, which we'll get to, but before you find a Sarah and Dan, you've got to find some other folks in there that kind of help you understand maybe what you're not looking for. So, there's the traditional methods. You look through some of the case studies, you talk to other agencies and grazings, but we really kind of quickly and surprisingly learned there wasn't really anyone pulling grazing as a program into really kind of that urban park interface. We got a lot of support and a lot of cheerleading. Like, hey, yeah, go for it. Good luck. Let us know. But really, we kind of had to understand we needed to go a different route and looking for that really kind of champion to help us navigate some of these hurdles. So really starts with the community partners. That was critical for us. And one thing that we did, which we are very fortunate to have, is one of those community partners, Sarah, quickly convinced us that she had the knowledge, the expertise, and really just that passion to go help us through this journey of navigating conversations with not just grazers, but our operations teams, finding out from other city entities what kind of barriers are there, and then really coming together and helping us find solutions to get past them. So, from there, you really go back and look at some of your implementation. How are we going to do this in year one? And that's where we lean on our operations team, the folks that are managing the sites, the grounds now. So in Petaluma, we've got now 48 parks. We also manage open spaces like you all likely do. So starting with that kind of massive amount of land and working it down with Sarah, with your operations teams to understand which ones are challenging, which ones could we use, which ones should not be on the table, and really kind of formalizing strategies that starts at a level that we all felt comfortable with, knowing we have to have some of these critical elements to keep this a viable program, things like access to water, shade, security, etc. So with those kind of criteria and talking with your operations, you're slowly kind of refining that list to a manageable amount. Next slide, please. All right, back to Delana.
And as Drew mentioned, establishing partnerships has been one of the vital elements of success for our program. We've been able to build these partnerships through this process. When we kicked off our pilot program in 2023, it took us a little longer to get an agreement in place and actually get hooves on the ground than we would have anticipated. a lot of times as a city or as a local jurisdiction, you have some examples to work off of. You have maybe a professional services agreement that's similar, maybe a site license that's similar, but for us, this was brand new. So we were kind of starting from scratch. And when we kicked off in 2023, we partnered with Chase and his wife, Emma, of Chasing Goat Grazing. And we're really thankful for the patience that they showed through the process. They probably showed us more patience than we deserved in getting that initial contract off the ground. But we are now partnered, as you've mentioned, with Daniel Northern, Chris Cornett of Two Rock Land Management, who have just been absolutely phenomenal partners. And not just in completing the grazing as contracted, but in their willingness to dream with us a little bit. When we've brought forward ideas of a year-round flock or how we invite our private parcel owners into the grazing program, we haven't heard no. We've just heard, let's think about it. You know, let's consider these elements. Let's make sure we can be successful together. Another strong partnership that has developed through our pilot process has been with our residents. So when we initially set this program up in 2023, we were really intentional in using our West Side neighborhood, Westridge, as a pilot neighborhood, because I'm sure many of you have these little pockets of your city. We knew whether it was good, bad, or ugly, Westridge was going to give us the feedback that we needed. So of course, in our first year, as fate would have it, our Westridge neighbors were so excited about the program that one of them tried to hand feed the sheep over the fence, which led to the sheep crowding the fence, knocking it over, and the sheep getting loose. So this was a critical moment in our program, make or break. We now have loose ag animals on the streets. How is our community going to react? Thankfully, they reacted with funny Facebook videos, and we just got free press out of the deal. So 20 minutes later, the shepherd had the sheep safely back into the fence. Everyone made a joke out of it. We got free press, and it was wonderful. But in that moment, we built trust with our residents. They saw that, hey, we have control of the situation. We have the right people in the right places at the right time to make sure that this program can be successful. Lastly, our community partners started to notice the benefits of grazing on those neighboring parcels. So we had the opportunity last year to collaborate with the River Park, who borders our Steamers Landing Park, and we were able to work with them to have their parcel grazed as well. This year, we're looking forward to collaboration with our Memorial Park and to begin to build more continuous parcels for grazing throughout our entire city. Now, one of the most common questions that we get asked about our grazing program is, how does this pencil out? And as an analyst, I can assure you I've spent more time than I'd like to admit trying to determine how to make the dollars and cents make sense. And the reality is that mechanical vegetation removal, mowing, weed eating is less expensive on a per acre basis. There's really no two ways about that. But as you've likely experienced in your personal lives, innovation is more expensive. The cheapest option doesn't automatically make it a winner for being the best steward of public funds. So when we start to step back and notice there's a lot of economic opportunities that grazing presents. And we've been really thankful to work with our fire marshal to look at the benefits of grazing as it pertains to wildfire risk. And our fire marshal did an exercise just to give us an idea of a 1 to 3 acre fire. Several other jurisdictions have similar challenges to the City of Petaluma with our shelterless population. And especially in this time of year, we see a lot of warning fires, and sometimes those warning fires can get out of control. So in one of our parks, Steamers Landing, that's been a historical issue and a concern. So the photo that you see here is a demonstration of our Steamer Landing Park. So you can see on the right side, or on the left side for you probably, this is the area that was grazed. And so you can see not only does grazing take down the tall vegetation, as you can see it's larger here on this side, but they also uplimb the trees. And when you create this disconnect between the tall grass and the lower limbs of the trees, you prevent the fire's ability to get up into the trees, and then it's not at the mercy of the wind. So our hearts go out to Southern California right now with everything that they're facing. But it's another opportunity to say that, yes, on a per acre basis, grazing is more expensive. But if we're able to stop even one wildfire, we've already mitigated those costs. And when we also start to look at the improvements in soil health, erosion control, reduced compaction, and the diminished need for regrading or silt barriers, those costs begin to drop as well. And grazing naturally controls invasive species, which to Drew's point minimizes the chemical treatments and reseeding expenses. And replacing mechanical mowing lowers noise, dust, and emissions, which reduces our public health complaints and related response costs. We had some wonderful comments coming back from our community members. So that positive public sentiment, it fuels education and community engagement. It fosters support for our city projects, and it lessens opposition. The ability to work with our local ag operators further avoids the expense of specialized contractors and equipment. It helps us to preserve wildlife habitats, and it cuts our future restoration costs. So meeting these carbon, habitat, and water quality standards also circumvents potential regulatory fines and compliant expenses. So when you really start to combine these direct and indirect costs, we look at the approximation of $150,000 to $700,000 for a city similar in scale to Petaluma. So when you look at those per acre costs, there's so many more considerations that need to be made than the pure dollars and cents of a per acre economic consideration. And a couple of the lessons that we learned through this program is that effective vegetation management through grazing has successfully targeted our vegetation growth. It has contributed to our wildfire risk mitigation, and it has provided a natural alternative to chemical herbicides and mechanical methods. It aligns with our integrated pest management program, and it supports our broader goals of carbon neutrality and sustainable operations. One of our most exciting opportunities and lessons that we've learned is that our community was ready and excited for this. Our community went through a fairgrounds process where they were very outspoken in letting us know that our agricultural history is very important to them, and it's something that they want to hold on to. So that strong community engagement amplifies our impact. The residents' enthusiastic response, which is exemplified by our community member we will name as Fence Lady, and we'll talk about her in the next slide. But it underscores the importance of public involvement and the value of education and transparent communication. So ultimately, our scalable and sustainable model of vegetation management not only demonstrates environmental responsibility and economic efficiency, but we're also setting a precedent for other cities and jurisdictions who are seeking that same balance of resource stewardship with fiscal prudence. And I'll just tell you a quick story here with our photo. So we went out with our grazing team to Rockaway Management to do a little stress testing on the fence. And you can't see the fence here from this photo because of the vegetation that's there. But we wanted to make sure that our neighbors' fences would be able to sustain a couple of sheep, maybe leaning up on them as they were doing their grazing. And one of our community members came out to let us know that she did not appreciate our stress testing of her fence. But we took it as an opportunity to educate. So we let her know what we were doing, why we felt the program was important, and she kind of went on her way. So this photo was taken that day when we ran into her. And then a week later, once the grazing was done in this area, I went back to take this photo, and I was fortunate to run back into that same community member. So I took it as an opportunity to see how she felt now that she'd seen the results. And I received a complete 180. She had gone out, she had met some of her neighbors for the first time because they went out to see the sheep. And she was so thrilled that there was now a fire break between her fence and the vegetation. And instead of being a naysayer of our program, she actually became a promoter of the program within the neighborhood. Another wonderful example that we had here and before and after, and this was feedback that our grazer received directly. The neighbors here in this home said they've lived there for, I think it was over 20 or 30 years. And this was the first time that they had ever been able to see through this area behind their home. So again, the peace of mind, the security that we're able to provide for our community members by creating these fire breaks around their homes has been completely invaluable. Turn it over to Drew for our looking ahead.
Thanks, Delana. I love pictures. Just get lost there. And yeah, I just want to recognize, I think Lauren had a question in the chat. So grazing is more expensive per acre. She want to probably make sure she heard that right. I mean, yes, we want, if you take something away from this, we want to kind of underscore that the reason the impetus to go into this process was not a pure cost saving exercise. So we don't go into grazing thinking that we're going to save money in operations in year one. However, I think that is part of our plan and should be a part of your objectives to say, hey, there's all these other opportunity costs or real calculable tangible costs that will even out. So not one acre is created equal, and you all manage a unique set of landscapes. As you manage more acres, the costs come down. As you manage more open space versus some of the acres that we're managing in Petaluma are just more expensive because of the transport in, either the lack of shade, water, etc. But we just wanted to make sure, I think everyone goes into this without rosy colored glasses to say, hey, we did the math. Why is this more expensive here? Until you start really calculating and being honest with your community about what are those other benefits, then you're on your way. And then as you scale up, the overall costs we're seeing are coming down. So I want to underscore that, and obviously Delana is our analyst on this, who's been breathing the numbers. So as we have more information and we put our plan together, that's really going to be more of a comprehensive analysis of what it's been costing us year 1, 2, 3. Looking ahead, super excited and fortunate to have been a recipient for the LandSmart grant. As we talked about, one of those big elements is putting all this kind of lessons learned into kind of cohesive plan to talk about what is the future, the next year, 2, 3, 4. But right off kind of the bat, what we're doing is building those coalitions of other land managers within even the city. We've got wastewater treatment centers, we've got water agencies, we've got public works utilities. There are different HOAs, landscape assessment districts. There are others that manage lands that either abut to city-owned property or are part of the same communities that we are grazing in. So, future goals are to add and integrate these properties to where you're transporting your herds and floods with less through the vehicles, but more navigating through the cities. And that's a spectacle for a lot of us. It's very common for a few that are on the call, but less common that folks go out and get their paper and see, a flock heading to the next site through their landscape district. So really trying to tell the story as we go, building coalitions with other land managers that have properties or oversight of vegetation management within those properties, and then building that into kind of a cohesive plan that we can kind of take on the road. That's really it. And I also wanted to kind of underscore something Delana said about, Westridge. There are some communities that, are maybe more vocal, maybe just their landscaping is much more challenged, or they may really want and be willing to really help come on board to do something different. And so those are the ones too, where maybe it's only an acre or two of land, but it really helps build your coalition to help you all kind of move forward and support the program. So it really, really encourage you not to look at an acre as the same as an acre. Really kind of find those subsets in your community that you think would really embrace a program like this, and start smaller to make sure that they have a voice in the program, because they pay dividends when you need the support.
So the part that you all came for is, where do we start? If we want to have a grazing program in our city, in our jurisdiction, where do we start? So as Drew alluded to, the best first step you can take is to meet with your operations team. Have them tell you what landscapes you already have that are challenging to maintain. And are they challenging because, like in our case, you have a chemical ban, maybe you have a no spray ban? Are they challenging from a topographical standpoint, are they steep? Are they rocky? Is it challenging to get mowers or weed eaters in those areas? Or is the vegetation itself challenging? We have been so excited to learn that sheep and goats love poison oak, and so have all of our maintenance team. Blackberries, another great opportunity. So really have an honest conversation with your operations team about what spaces are out there in your jurisdiction that is just truly a challenge to maintain. And for us, we look at fire safety first and foremost. So we're looking at where can we create those natural breaks for our neighbors? Where can we really make sure that we're being efficient? We were able to pilot a riparian zone, which many of our neighbors had been outspoken for years in their fears of, that becoming a fire corridor. And so we were able to pilot that this past year, and the feedback of getting that area cleaned up continues to be, we continue to receive that. So that's our first step. Our first and best recommendation for you is, your teams that are on the ground dealing with this right now, what are they facing? And for you, that might be contractors. Engage your contractors in these conversations as well. Secondly, as Drew mentioned, those connections that we made with our surrounding jurisdictions, and that isn't just, large open spaces. We do have a couple of open spaces, but primarily we do have urban territory. So not just your immediate towns, but anything that might have similar landscape to you. And then also just other people that are doing this. We spoke to several different grazers. We spoke to different people that are just advocates, resource conservation districts. We really did a lot of homework before we launched our program so that we could set ourselves up for success through the entirety of the program. Engaging with your community early and often. We have signage out before our sheep ever get to the parks. We try to get our signage out 2 weeks ahead of time so that our community knows, hey, this is coming. And then we give opportunities for them to touch base, not just with us, but directly with our grazer so that they can receive the information or the education directly from the grazers. We really want to make sure that all of our community members feel comfortable with the program and what it means to have this happening right against their homes. We rely heavily on our communications team, encouraging you to do the same, just the same as that signage goes up, using your social media channels. If you have community updates, any and everything you can do to make sure that your community is aware. I think nobody really likes to be surprised. I think this is a nice surprise, a happy surprise to see, sheep next to your home, but really the more that you can communicate and let people know that this is going to happen, that pays dividends in the long run. And then our last piece of advice for you is to scale with reason. We kicked off our initial pilot with 5 parks. So we were very selective in our parks for all the reasons that we said to check with your operations team. We did the same. We did some of them for their topography, some for the type of vegetation, some purely for the location within the city. We were really thoughtful about those first 5 parks. And then on our second year of the program, we felt comfortable enough with our experience to double it. So last year we did 10 of our parks, but we are all very familiar with those places and spaces. So we felt really comfortable. We're very aware of the neighborhoods that surrounded them. And as we move forward and continue to grow our program, we are very cautious and careful. We have some opportunities like in our wetlands. But we're engaging our partners with Point Blue and our Petaluma Wetlands Alliance to make sure that they feel like that's the right fit for those spaces as well. We would like to at some point look at creek maintenance through grazing. But again, we want to make sure that we're working with our county partners and our state partners on permitting and making sure that we're going about each stage of scaling this to make sure that we're protecting, all of our landscapes in the best way possible, but also making sure that our grazers aren't put in a position where, we should have had a permit and didn't execute it or anything like that. We want to be great partners for our grazers as well. So we will now hand it over to Sarah Keiser. Thank you all so much for the opportunity to talk about our program, and we'll also love to hear from Sarah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Delana and Drew. I feel like I don't even need to present at this point. That was an amazing presentation. And here we go. So first of all, I'd love to say thank you to Delana and Drew and the City of Petaluma for spearheading, taking a big leap. This was a big leap of faith to jump into this and to do it with so much passion and nuance to keep this going. I mean, it's been I feel very blessed to have been a part of this from the beginning. Thank you to our RCDs for their willingness to continue to be so flexible in their models of funding and supporting all different visions and being really creative about it. There's not many funding places that would be willing to do it this way. So a lot of partners came together to make this happen. And I think that's a big part of this, is collaboration is how we make these things happen. So I'm going to kind of talk from the grazer's perspective, from planning perspective, also from just community engagement, because I do a lot of that as well. And I think, you know, planning and collaboration is really critical. In this grazing, both Delana and Drew mentioned this, but grazing and your land stewardship of your public places are going to be very place-based. So bringing all the departments to the table is important. Like Delana was saying, who is having issues with brush? Where are brush an issue? Bring your fire marshal to the table. Where are they very concerned about brush that isn't appropriately managed because of lack of economic means or whatever that somebody hasn't thought about? Bring your grazer that's around you to the table, because they are going to see things differently and be able to highlight zones where they're like, it'd be so much easier to put the sheep in there than to try to weed whack. Or there's that hillside that's a lot of rocks. Let's use the sheep because they're not going to nick and start a fire. There's a lot of considerations here, and understanding what animals, we're going to go into that a little bit later. But bring the people to the table that have that place-based knowledge and think about how to do this together in a really strategic place, and start where the animals are going to be the best place for you to utilize them. And then also, I love that Drew and Delana talked about this as well, but consider this a long-term solution with a bigger vision. So we all have annual economics, we have annual budgets we have to stick to. But if we look at this as a 5-year evolution, the economics pencil out better because the ecological benefits pencil out. If we do graze really strategically and we're working on reducing or eliminating non-natives and bringing back the native bunch grasses, these things don't create the ladder fuel. They don't have that burnability because you have green plants with long root systems. They really increase your carbon sequestration all year round. So if we look at this, not just vegetation management, but a 5 to 10 year goal of transforming our ecosystems back to a healthy fire ecosystem, we don't have to have a high annual cost because we've created a system that doesn't need that impact every single year. Community engagement is really important, and education. And Drew and Delana said the same thing. Bring people to the table, let them be excited about it, answer their questions, people want to be heard. And when they get to be heard, they're so much more open to new things happening. Like the woman who was upset about the fence, at first she was, you know, kind of upset with us, but going through it, she was actually really excited because we're willing to hear what she had to say. She's concerned about her fence. Fences are expensive. She can't build a new fence. You know, is this going to be a cost that she can incur, you know, take care of? So listening is a big part of it, and making sure everybody's on board. And they already talked about this. Think big, start small. Where is grazing your most effective tool? So, you know, start with 4 or 5 pilots or 2 pilot parks that maybe look like this where the goats are, that it's heavy brush or it's lots of blackberry, it's lots of poison oak. People have trouble getting in there. Utilize the animals to go in places and serve you in a way first where it's really been difficult to get humans or equipment into there to do that work for you. So some things to consider when you're doing public land grazing. All of these things are not a hindrance. They're just things to know that you have to consider them as a public land manager. The potential for livestock guardian dogs. This is one of my dogs, that's Miss Yuta with the baby goat. And depending upon where you are, you may need to have livestock guardian dogs if there is a high predation issue for the sheep or goats. In the city of Petaluma, both Chase of Chase and Goat Grazing and Chris and Dan of Two Rock did not need to use dogs. But there may be some situations if you're abutting a big open space or you know there's heavy predation, a dog may be necessary. But these public land managers, these grazers who have these dogs have dogs that are used to being around the public. They're very easy to be around, and they just are going to keep those animals safe without affecting the wildlife in a negative way, and also not having lots of losses due to predation. The fencing that they use, and this is how we are able to do really good management, is a portable electric fencing, making sure, using your comms department, making sure everybody knows it's electric, making sure your fencing is very clear it's electric. I would even recommend at your first graze being there present to remind everybody there it's electric, because people forget. So the electric fencing is how we're able to really utilize the animals to provide the services we're needing. We just need to make sure the public knows that that's electric. That's how they stay in, but it's also how we keep predators out, which is usually like a coyote or a dogs, you know, like pet dogs get excited when they see sheep too. And that's the next one. So letting people know, and we had that experience at a couple of parks, is if we get our signs there 2 weeks early and we let the public know the sheep are going to be there. So the day the sheep are coming, they know that for that week, the sheep are there. They keep their dogs on a leash. They were incredibly receptive to that concept. We just need to let them know when it was happening. So again, that communication and knowing that people's pets are going to be very excited by sheep. It's really exciting for a city dog to see sheep, and they are going to want to chase those sheep. They're really fun to chase. They run away. So letting people know that pet dogs, it's not that they're bad, but they're going to want to chase sheep. It's just natural for them. The shepherd's housing. So almost all of our contract grazers have shepherds who live in campers with the sheep. It reduces their liability. If the sheep get out, like what happened in Petaluma, we had a shepherd there who could just get them in right away. If a sheep gets stuck in a fencing, if anything happens, that person's there to manage that. And usually they're in a camper trailer. So a public land manager needs to know that there may be a trailer there. Where do we put this? What's the best place for it? Let the community know that that housing's for the shepherd. It's not an unhoused person or a situation which people are concerned about. Most of our shepherds are Spanish speaking primarily, so also letting the public know that the shepherd is Spanish speaking. We have a lot of Spanish speakers in our community, but we want people to know that if you're speaking English and they're not responding, it's because they're not understanding you. Again, the signage 2 weeks before the graze is really, really helpful. Let people know. And then the last thing, what we talked about, is livestock occasionally do get loose. So that's, again, why we want a shepherd there. And that's why we talked to people about that possibility. In the neighborhood in Petaluma where they got loose, everybody was so excited. I think before Drew or I even knew they were loose, there was videos on Facebook. Before any of us knew, they were actually posting it and everybody was really excited. And I think there was like some free grazing. There's no damage, but that's also why your grazers have liability insurance. If a very expensive rose gets eaten or there is some sort of damage, there is insurance involved for that. But letting people know that's a possibility and how to maybe help if that happens. I did have several community members in that neighborhood come up to me and they were so excited that they got to be a shepherd for a day. They're like, we got to herd the sheep. So they loved helping the shepherd bring the sheep back in. Turned out to be a really good situation for everybody. So what type of livestock is right for your city? This is why it's a place-based solution. In City of Petaluma, there's a lot of conceptions about what animals will eat, what animals won't eat. Goats serve a great purpose, so do sheep. Sheep will often eat brush like goats, so you don't have to pick one. Talk to your local grazers, see what's going to serve the landscape that you're serving. Cattle can be great if you live in a place where you have open preserves of like 50 or 100 acres. Cows are a great option. Every animal serves a place and every animal can do good grazing if they're managed appropriately. It's really about good management. So you're looking at the landscape, you know your goals, and you're putting the right amount of impact and then a right amount of rest. And every single one of these animals can serve that goal depending upon your landscape. And if you have grazers around, they can talk to you about this. I'm happy to talk to anybody more about what animals will eat and where they work. Right now, the animal of what everybody loves is goats. You know, they're like kind of the animal people are used to seeing, and they're a great choice, but they tend to be a little more precocious. They often are the ones that might get out of the fencing. So sheep are sometimes better in a public place, but not always. You know, reach out to the grazers near you, get to know the people around you. They're going to help you identify which animals are right for your public land. So there are a lot of benefits to grazing, but especially in a public land, in public lands, there are, well, really for all lands, there are two different tools we have in which the fuel is getting consumed or transformed. There's good fire, in which vegetation gets transformed and you're adding benefits to the soil, and there's grazing where they're consuming it, they're eating it and adding manure and urine where you're adding that topsoil. So almost all of our other tools, you're just cutting it down and leaving it. So you're not really transforming it. You're still keeping it on the ground. You're not kind of changing that ecosystem. You're just looking at vegetation management. So when you're looking at the IPMP for City of Petaluma, one of the goals was to reduce synthetic chemicals. Livestock is a great way to reduce your chemical usage. They can come in, they can do basically any sort of service you're looking for. And that's why I do recommend engaging your fire marshal. Because if there are zones where you know fire may be really risky at coming into your community, you can have heavier impact with the livestock and actually create fire breaks with livestock if you want to do that. It just takes some feeding and different process, but they can create a fire break if needed. Or you do impact in which you're trying to have impact and bring back some of our clumping grasses, open up the area, break down the invasive non-native annual grasses that outcompete those natives and start to change the ecosystem. There's a lot of different ways they do that, and they do that without chemicals, and they do that without gasoline, which is another thing. So we're looking at ecological regeneration. I just was at a conference the last couple of days where we were talking about this, and it's about kind of instead of just looking at tall grass as, and William Hurt said it right in the beginning, as a burden that we have to break down, how do we start to identify it as a resource and a tool for us to engage our agricultural community and start changing our landscape and changing the commitment of our community to that ongoing process? It also generally, you have very high positive feedback from your community members. Work with your grazer, make sure you have healthy animals coming in, make sure that the community sees a good graze where it doesn't look like there's too much impact. Talk to people about how grazing is going to look a little different than a mowed lawn. Like create all that and everybody will be engaged and a part of that process. Also, getting ahead of the curve. We are currently in a changing climate. Fires are coming, and when we have another atmospheric river coming here to Sonoma County. So we're not just managing vegetation. We are looking at ecosystem services because we need to manage our vegetation in the summer so that our soil opens up and accepts the rain in the winter. And so we can use grazing animals to do that long-term year-round vision. We don't want to do a system in which we're having hard compact soils where the water washes away, we lose that topsoil. We have more damage with rain. We want the rain to be able to open up and go down into our aquifers. And grazing can do that very effectively. So I wanted to show a couple of pictures. These pictures, I have two from John Bailey from UCCE up in Hopland. And he got some really good pictures of how grazing affects wildfire. And wildfire, I wanted to really make sure that I identified that this is wildfire, this isn't a healthy burn. Because if you can see where it's black and then it's no longer black, you can see that's actually a fence line. On the side that wasn't really burned heavily, there's maybe a few pockets there. That was where they grazed. On the other side, they hadn't grazed. And you can see where they had not grazed, it became it went up into the canopy. It became a canopy fire, and a lot of those oaks are going to die because of that fire. Where the animals had grazed, it never got into the trees. So it became a healthy restorative fire because of the grazing impact. And that fence line is a very clear picture of that. There's one more picture from as well. So again, grazing, the animals consume the vegetation, they add manure and urine to add topsoil. They also, all the little microorganisms in rumen, their first stomach, is the same thing that's in our soil. So they're good to go in after a burn because they will actually regenerate and bring that soil back to life through their poop because it has their manure, because it has all that microorganisms in it. There's a real connection of soil and ruminants and microorganisms. So they transform it, they add the topsoil, and their hooves aerate the soil and soften it and flake it up. So the rains, when they come, they go into the soil. And again, that's through what I always call good grazing. It's like that really strategic land stewardship grazing that our contract grazers provide for us. Here's the same place, just a picture right down the fence line. So on the right is where there was not grazing, and on the left is where there was grazing. And you can see where there's grazing, there's still some dry vegetation there. You can see the little paths the sheep had made. And on the right, you can see the canopy burn. And what I find, there needs to be a little bit more research on this. I've been into a lot of places post-burn where there was grazing. And what I found the most fascinating about it is you'll have canopy burns where it's like all the trees are on fire. It hits the fence line where the grazing and it drops out of the canopy. And I don't know how that works, but I'm not sure how it works, but they actually stop these canopy fires with grazing a lot of times. There's some sort of different ecosystem that is created through that grazing model. So that's something to think about as we are all in fire. LA is in fire. We need to understand that it's around us. How do we steward our landscape so that we can keep the fires healthy and balanced in a fire ecosystem? Okay, now we get to go to the fun stuff. So we're going to talk about the day the sheep arrive. So this is when Chris and Dan's sheep came into our first location at Steamer Landing Park. And I'm going to give a little plug here. And Emma and Rose, if you could drop it into the chat. The Transhumans Festival, which is sassyandgrassy.com, is in Petaluma on Saturday, April 12th. We run the sheep. It's the transition of the animals from the hills to the lower valleys, and we run the sheep through the city of Petaluma. Come, you can help us herd them through. They come to Steamer Landing Park, and we have music and food and a festival and the celebration of pastoralism and grazing in the city of Petaluma. It's their festival, their sheep, their grazing. That's all being celebrated this year, especially. So next is just a funny little video. Dan, you're gonna like this one. This is the day. So everybody, I want to show everybody what it looks like when the sheep come out of the trailer. So if you see sheep coming up above, because they're not as tall as cows, there's 2 layers of sheep in these big trailers, which is kind of nice. You can get a lot more of them in there. And this is them coming onto Steamer Landing the first day out of the top level of the trailer. There we go. Sorry, I had to do that. That was cute. Oops. Likes to show it again. There we go. So I just wanted you to see how the sheep come in, how excited they are. Dan and Chris's sheep, if anybody knows of like there's a classing system to show how well fed they are. Their sheep are very well fed. And that's the nice thing about contract grazing is they're moving to feed, to feed, to feed, to feed. So a lot of people we're not only supporting agriculture, we're supporting good agriculture where they're moving across the landscape, not going back onto the areas where they've just left manure, getting new quality feed, providing services, and providing local food to their community. I think that's another piece we really need to emphasize here is as fuel gets more expensive, we need to start highlighting and serving those agricultural communities so that we have that food source ongoing, land stewardship, connection, and food source all in one. And this is just some of my sheep. My animals are way too friendly. So if anybody ever wants to come and hug a sheep, let me know because they love to be hugged. And that's all for me.
Yay. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks everyone for presenting. That was really awesome. So much good information there. And I know someone asked in the chat if they could see the PowerPoint afterwards because there's a lot to digest. So we'll send that out. And then I'll just share my screen and show y'all if you're feeling really fired up right now and you want to learn more about grazing. We have another event coming up and Sarah's going to be there as well. And this one's going to be in person. So this will give you a chance to be on the ground. You'll get to see some of the animals and also just dive deeper into the ecological benefits and all of the wildfire resilience benefits that you can get from grazing. And that'll be at the Laguna de Santa Rosa Foundation, Saturday, March 29th. And you can find more information at goldridgercd.org/events. You can also scan that QR code and we can drop the Eventbrite in the chat as well. So I just wanted to give a heads up on that. And then we can move into our Q&A section. So let's see, we did get some questions in the chat. as we are going through, and Emma too, if you would want to unmute and read out some of those questions, that would be super helpful.
Sure, happy to. Lauren asked, grazing is more expensive per acre, question mark, which Drew kind of answered, but I don't know if we want to go a little bit more into that.
I can just say, because I know, hi, Lauren. It's also location specific. So we are in a region in which contract grazing is much more expensive than certain parts of our state. So you may need to look at your current system and look at the current rates, because in Sonoma County, Marin County, Mendocino, we are a higher rate system because it's just a more expensive place to live. Insurance costs more. So, you know, do your own research on that with your local grazers to see what their cost is before you make that assumption, because Sonoma County, it is going to be a lot higher than other places.
Yeah, and I'll also add that to Sarah's point, it is very landscape specific. So if you had a 1,000-acre open space parcel, that's going to be very different from the parcels that we're asking of our grazers. You know, some of our parcels are 3 acres or 5 acres, and that's much more challenging to get your animals in and out of. That's a lot more labor for our grazers and for their shepherds. So there are costs associated for our grazers, and they also have to make ends meet on their end. So it really is landscape specific, and that goes back to, you know, really checking in with your operations team and making sure that you're looking at which landscapes you have that make the most sense for grazing.
And thank you both. And I'm gonna put Dan on the spot here for a little bit. But you know, as our grazer too, Dan, I kind of touched on, you know, there's land specifics. There's also kind of the fixed infrastructure you need, you know, your fencing, your labor costs, your access to water, shade, transportation. So can you maybe speak to, if you have someone new looking and evaluating their sites, they're looking, hey, I think I've got some parcels here. You know, which one of those I think are your biggest cost, or would you recommend folks really, you know, narrow in on from those suite of costs that you as a grazer incur?
Well, anybody that we deal with, I really encourage, and somebody, not being us specifically, but actually physically coming to look at it. Because like you guys said, every site is different. I mean, rocks, steep hills, concrete, no water, it's all different.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I don't know. The best thing is just to have people, a grazer come and look at it and chat with whoever's interested and go from there.
Yeah. And would you say, you know, one thing that you build into your costs is the fencing, right? So that's a cost, whether the site, most of the sites that you're coming in Petaluma doesn't have fencing that, you know, you can really have. We don't have that infrastructure in most areas, which is why we do this, but that's a cost that you just kind of build in to your operation, right? So it's not something that cities should expect to see anything different, right?
No, yeah, it's everything's going up, sadly. Like I can't even remember what those nettings were when I first started buying them, but they're a lot more expensive now. And then like labor across the whole state of California, insurance, like you guys said. I mean, I just had a chat with my insurance company a few months ago. There's only, according to them, there's only 2 commercial insurance providers in the state. So I called the other one and checked. I wanted to stay with the same. So
Yep. Hurry up. Don't
everything's
submit
going
any
up.
claims. Yep. Just joking.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Dan.
And I think that was one of
Sorry, go ahead, sir.
oh, I think that was one of Amber's questions, was the liability insurance. And yes, that is covered by the grazer as part of their service. And most grazers, like Dan was saying, is that they're going to charge a per acre cost, and incorporated that is their insurance, their time, their shepherd, their per acre. You're not paying more on top of that. But yes, especially if you're doing fuel management and you're grazing later in the year, shade is really important, and access to water is important. At the City of Petaluma, we were able to use fire hydrants. Chris and Dan do have a water trailer too, so they can fill it up and bring it to the location. So a lot of contract grazers will have a way to manage it, but yes, they need to go see the site. And if it's lacking all of those things, your costs may go up a little bit because you're looking at them having to provide a lot more. So again, like Dan said, it is really important to bring, and that's what I really like that Drew and Delana did too, is like right away, we just drove around, we looked at all the parks, we walked the parks, and we thought about which ones were best. Get your boots on the ground. Maps are great, but you need to walk the land to really know how it's going to be managed as a grazer with the livestock.
Awesome. Thank you. We're jumping around a little bit here, so we want to get all your questions in. Hector from Cloverdale wants a PowerPoint, which we will give you. Sorry, I'm just reading off the questions in order. Sarah asked for site-specific challenges. How did you measure the impacts you mentioned? Soil health, biodiversity, carbon emissions, and have you been able to publish those findings? We do have a few resources, Sarah, that we can send out with the follow-up email of the recording that include there's a resource from the city of Healdsburg that has policies for humane treatment of animals in grazing operations. We also, the LandSmart team does photo monitoring and gauges impact of grazing on all of our sites. So we can share some of that information with you. If you go to either, right now, Sonoma RCD's website is probably the best to kind of see the phases of the LandSmart program and the effects and impacts that it's had over the years. And then we just have a few more resources that we'll send out with the follow-up from the webinar. The next question we'll move to is from Sandra. Delana, you mentioned the numbers 150 to 700K. What was that in reference to?
Yeah, those numbers were in reference to the potential savings that you could have. Like we talked about, if you're able to prevent a wildfire because you've grazed in a certain area, then you're preventing those costs. And additionally, our fire marshal would also point out that it's not just like dollars and cents cost too, but when you do have a fire, then you're using that water that's washing out into your rivers or your streams, you know, any of those if it gets into any buildings or any infrastructure, all of that is bringing, you know, toxic chemicals into the air. Like there are much bigger impacts than just dollars and cents there. But that figure specifically is just the potential savings of those, you know, preventing regulatory or compliance costs, any of those. It just is kind of a culmination of all of the potential savings you can have by doing grazing.
Awesome. Thanks, Delana. Next, we'll go to Ojai Valley Fire Safe Council. They asked, can you speak on any experience or research grazing in riparian zones? And then also, do you have any complaints or oppositions from community members or environmental groups regarding animal welfare? Like if an animal died or got injured on site. So first, let's do the experience on research grazing in riparian zones. And then I know Sarah will be able to speak to the animal welfare stuff.
Yeah, I could probably speak. Hi, Chris. Glad you're here. There is some research, and I think maybe that's one thing I can find is there is some research on grazing riparian zones. It's a lot about timing. And to be honest, at this point, a lot of riparian zones have been so under impacted that they're where the fires get chased through. So also there's like riparian zones that are perennial versus annual, and there's going to be different management with both of them. But the complete lack of impact they've found isn't good, but it's the appropriate impact and the timing. And if you have if you have one that's not perennial, your impact is during the dry season and uplimbing. And they've also done research. I know people are worried about manure and stuff and toxicity, and the sheep and goats manure has very low toxicity. They've done tests where it gets with the ruminant, it gets processed out really quickly. It's what's far worse in those riparian zones are like fecal matter from raccoons, fox, dogs, cats. Those are more precarious. So we're still working on getting more of that research, but there are a few articles on that I'll look for you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for sending that, Sarah. Because what happens, hi there, by the way. Callie's with me.
Hello.
So you're waiting for you. Anyhow, You're right, though. The riparian zones we're referring to are fire pathways into our area, right? And we've mentioned to the Land Conservancy doing a lot of the arundo removal. How about maintaining that area after you do that with some grazing moving through rapidly to do that? And there's a lot of pushback from the environmental community on grazing. They don't understand, if you have animals, it's E. coli and we're all going to die, right? And so it's really necessary that we overcome that here because we think it's a really good tool. And there's a lot of pushback on it.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's definitely something we need to get more clear research on, and just also understanding what, a healthy riparian ecosystem looks like. And just like we need to know what a healthy fire ecosystem looks like. And it is a little different aesthetically than what people are used to. So helping people understand what that healthy ecosystem looks like and how targeted grazing or prescribed grazing in which you're utilizing them as a tool to come through and maintenance. I mean, they're a great maintenance tool for our forests, for our riparian zones, and for those zones that do burn heavy. We have to maybe do some big work, but then we need that maintenance or else it'll just go back into that place where it's going to burn again. So yes, all of that needs to be worked on.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Keep
Chris.
up the good work.
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, Sarah.
So your question.
Just on the animal welfare, Sarah in some of the first walks with us said, this is why your community communications really need to be one of those first department stakeholders, because we kind of help build out, you're never going to get them all, but let's just say 80% of your FAQs are going to be around the same types of questions that we generally see when you see grazing in an area that people aren't familiar with. It's, hey, these sheep must be starving and they don't have water or shade. A lot of it is just getting that communications out there so that people can quickly see it before your grazers arrive is huge. And then having folks on the ground that communicate up to say, all right, these are some of those weird one-off questions we're getting. Like people ask us, when are we going to come back and pick up the poop? That was the first questions we get. It's like, wow, didn't have that on the FAQ, but let's talk about that. Let's talk about how, you're welcome. We're going to leave the poop behind, and this is why. So those are kind of the things that you really want to engage your, whatever that is, your communications team, your marketing folks, people that update your websites early.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that, Drew. I forgot about the animal welfare. Yeah, so we did have to talk about how the manure is actually really healthy for a soil, and we're looking at building the soil and making it better for the rains. I also really, really highly recommend that the grazer doesn't do any lambing or kidding, no babies while they're doing public land grazing. Because no matter how cute baby lambs or goats are, that is when the worst stuff happens in our agricultural community. When babies are being born is when bad things happen. So don't do that on a public graze. Talk to your grazer about that not happening during your graze. Because people see dead lamb, it's going to turn the whole world off to what you're doing, And even if you do your best management, babies die more than adults. It's just the way it is in all things. But and having healthy, well-fed animals, talking to your grazer, I mean, and that's what Healdsburg does too. There's like a body scaling measurement, and when you saw Dan's sheep coming out of the trailer, they're all kind of round and chubby. They're well fed, they look good, they're healthy, they have good feet. So making sure that your grazer is like that you have a conversation about if you have animals that aren't healthy, they don't come to the public graze. Or if something happens, like in the best situation, an animal can get sick or things can happen. You talk to your grazer about if there's ever a sick animal, they're gone immediately. They go back to the ranch for vetting or whatever needs to happen with them. So really making sure that the animals, and especially your pilot year, that all the animals are fat and healthy and robust. And if there is anything go wrong, they just get pulled. They go back. So keep those front-facing livestock really the best, healthiest of the crew.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we are cruising through these questions. The next question is from Kim. Is there a seasonality to when you should be getting the herds on site versus when you might want to hold off due to erosion or protecting specific species, regen, etc.?
Great question, Kim. Thank you. So, and Delana unmuted too. I'll just go broad. This really depends upon the goals of your management goals. And I will tell you, like most city public land managers can't afford multiple applications of grazing. I mean, in a perfect world, and I already told Dan and Chris this, we're going to have a herd of sheep that just never leaves Petaluma and just moves around and takes care of all the public parks and takes care of the private residents around there. And they just stay and they're just moving around, because if we want ecological transformation, you need to have a couple of grazing impacts a season. I mean, that's really what you need to. Most people want to pay for one, so you're timing it so that you graze where there's going to be, it's kind of later, maybe depending upon where you live and your climate, maybe it's May, where you're going to be able to graze and won't have a lot of regrowth. Because if you graze too early, you're going to have to pay for another graze because there's regrowth. That's why we waited for the riparian zones, which needed a lot of work that had not been touched and were right in the middle of neighborhoods. They went into them in like August at the end of the graze, because that's when the riparian zones are dry, and that's when there's willows and all this stuff for their shade and food for the sheep, uplimbing. So it's really a strategy based on the goals of the land manager. And we are piloting another graze at the Laguna uplands. Did I say that right, William? Okay. Where we're doing 2 impacts this year and 2 impacts next year in like January and March, because if you want to eliminate the really fast growing invasive non-native plants like Spanish oat, you need to impact them early in January because they outcompete everybody. So if we can do 2 grazes and time it, because we can, it's a smaller landscape and we have the capacity to, we get to see over 2 years how quickly we change that landscape with 2 seasons of impact. As far as erosion goes, good grazing rarely causes erosion. I don't see it. If they go through steep places and you move them through appropriately, they open up the soil. So I see less soil come off of those hillsides after a graze. Usually erosion caused by grazing is from animals staying too long and causing impact or compaction to that landscape. And that's what you get erosion. So with prescribed grazing, because of their movement, we don't really see erosion. It's not one of the things we see. We usually see less erosion due to their impact. And Dan and Delana.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. The only other comment that I would add to the timing piece for us personally, even though we are a city department, we are not outside of our fire marshal's mandates for weed abatement. So that is the timeline that we abide by. And thankfully, our partners have always been wonderful. Daniel and Chris have been really wonderful in working with us. It does put a little bit of time pressure on them to get all the acreage that we have in our program done. This year, May 31st is that drop dead date for our fire marshal, and we get fined just like anyone else does. It doesn't matter that we're a different city department. We are on the same timeline. So for internally for us, we set that drop dead date, and then we work backwards with our grazer to make sure that we can have enough time. We've done a great job over the last 2 years of making sure that we give ourselves a little bit of wiggle room, because it's not an exact science. You don't know exactly how many days it's going to take down whatever vegetation is in any given area. But it's really working closely with your grazer to make sure whatever that deadline is for your jurisdiction or for your city, that you're meeting that as well.
Great. Thank you, Delana and Sarah and Drew and everyone else. I just dropped Dan's contact in the chat as well. We can follow up with our webinar email with all these resources that we've been dropping in the chat. But that concludes our questions that we got in the chat. So if there's anyone else that wants to unmute at this time, feel free. We have about 5 more minutes before we're gonna.
I think I saw one more from Mauricio.
Oh, sorry.
But it came in a little later. It was asking if we can share if we know any similar partnership opportunities happening with RCDs in the East Bay.
I can jump in here, Rose. As far as I know, Goldridge and Sonoma are the only RCDs that have embarked on this type of program. We've certainly received interest from numerous RCDs throughout the state, but as far as I'm aware, we are the only ones. So maybe Mauricio, if you want to follow up with us, if you know, I don't know where exactly in the East Bay you're located. If you want to I'd be willing to reach out to our partners, whatever RCD that happens to be in your area. I mean, we're fortunate, or out of the disaster of 2017, we were able to create this program, right? So, but I think there are certainly, state agencies that are interested in using livestock for fuels management. We just have to continue to demonstrate that this is a good, tool to have in that toolbox. And then just continue to advocate for funding from our representatives and put that to use, right?
I see that Corey asked if we could share the information we passed on to residents. Oh, Emma, you responded. But yeah, Corey, email me directly, because we also just created a comms in the Google Drive that the city used, and it talks about what is good grazing and pictures, and then you could look through the City of Petaluma's Instagram too, and they have a whole web page where you can follow where the sheep are, which people love the web page. So the city really doing that outreach and having a web page and then all that stuff was really helpful, because then everybody can go look for the sheep and find them.
Yeah, 2 thumbs up for the sheep tracker. I mean, it's just, people love it. I can't explain it, but Dan, they love following you around. So I see why.
I love the sheep tracker. It's a great idea. Okay, got just about 1 minute left, and then we're gonna wrap up. If anyone has one final question, again, we'll work on getting all these resources together and the link to the recording and get that sent out to everyone probably early next week. So we have a few things to compile. But yeah, thanks so much to our speakers and project partners and all of you for coming and joining us today. Cool.
Thank you
All
for
right.
having us.
Thank
Yep.
you, Rose. Thank you, RCDs, Drew and
Yeah.
Delana.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good job, folks.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.